Yes. Welcome, everyone. So great to see so many of you today to our webinar on how to raise multilingual children. We have two guest speakers, Nadja Herkner and Mary Pat O'Malley, and they will answer your questions as many of them as possible. They will have a short presentation, and then the stage is yours and you can shoot your questions. I just want to quickly introduce Mothers in Business as the organizer. We're a Finnish network that supports career-oriented mothers in balancing their work and family life. And yeah, the association is now over 5 years old already. And we provide tools and skills for development and for career advancement. And yeah, we want to promote the role of mothers in the labor market and in the society at large. And just last year, we established Mothers in Business International. As I said, the Mothers in Business is a Finnish organization, and everything used to be in Finnish. And we noticed that also international mothers living in Finland would benefit a lot from all that great content that Mothers in Business is organizing. So we established the international project last year, and nowadays it's already completely integrated into the mother organization. And we aim to develop more content and activities for international mothers and also for Finnish mothers, of course, in English, so that everyone can come together and have the events and all that extensive knowledge that there is in Mothers in Business, also in the English language. And we have super great events this month. We still have one mingle coming up on the 19th on communicating with confidence. We have once a month, we have language cafes and Finnish communication classes for those who are interested in practicing language. The Finnish communication classes are focusing on Finnish, and then in the language cafe, we can practice as many languages as they are basically present. That's up to 3 languages in 1 hour you can choose to practice, which is also really nice when you have knowledge of different languages and you want to practice them. We don't at the moment have the stroller walks due to the corona situation, but hopefully again in the summer, for those mothers who are at home with their kids, they can join during the day the stroller walks in Helsinki, Tampere and Oulu. And still 2 very interesting webinars coming up, one on personal branding, and then our series of D&I starts on the 29th of March, and this will be a series with several events on diversity and inclusion. And special in our events, kids are very welcome to participate along, and at least our English events so far are free of charge and open for everyone. And you can find us on Facebook, on our website, and on Instagram. And if you want to send us an email, it's hello@mib.fi. That was it from my side. Juliet will very shortly introduce our speakers so that we can change the screen sharing. Go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, hi, my name is Juliet, and I'm also a volunteer in Mothers in Business International. And organizing this webinar on raising multilingual children was something that was very close to my heart, because I myself was raised bilingual, German-English. And now I'm married to a Finn, and we have a son, and we're trying to raise him trilingual with 3 languages. And I'm assuming that most of you who are listening today are having some sort of situation where you're trying to juggle languages and with your kids. And could you please mute your microphones? Thank you, so that we don't have so much interference, please. I know. And today we have 2 women who are here to help us through this jungle of information and confusion that you might find on the internet, and somebody's telling you to do this and someone else is telling you to do that. So to have a bit more of an idea about this. Hello, could you please mute your microphone?
Display, yeah.
Thank you. So we have for once Nadja Herkner. She's a speech and language therapist who herself speaks 3 languages, and she has a background in psychotherapy and specializes in helping bilingual children to face the challenges in language and speech development. Welcome. And then we also have Dr. Mary Pat O'Malley. She's also a speech and language therapist and a lecturer at NUI Galway. And Mary Pat has an interest also in multilingual families and also finds the time to write a blog about this. So maybe she can also give us some more information on that later on, because that would be something that you might want to have a look into. And now, so not to postpone this any further, I will hand the microphone over to you 2 lovely ladies and maybe give us an introduction and more closer introduction, who you are, what you do, and how you maybe help us through this.
Okay, thanks a million. Just in terms of screen sharing, can you allow me to screen share so I can share the presentation? It's only short anyway, so.
Look, here we have the first.
I seriously didn't know I needed to do that. So, Rabea.
Okay. Okay.
No, wait a second. I'll just need to put you in the. So many people that I need to find you among them. Sorry.
It's enough if you give it to Mary Pat. She has the presentation. I don't have to share the screen.
Basically, you can make her co-host.
Yes.
Juliet. Otherwise, I luckily have the presentation, so in case it doesn't
Oh,
work.
you have. Oh, okay. Well, if you have it, then. Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, that's probably easier then if you have it, and then you just open it on your screen, and then you'll know when, like, to go on to the next slide. Is that easier?
That works as well.
Okay. I don't mind, whichever is easiest for you.
Here we go. There we go.
Okay. So, Huva Homenda, everyone. I've been practicing that all morning, and unfortunately that's all I can say in Finnish, but I'm delighted to see everybody here and to be here with Nadja. And we just have a very short presentation to kind of talk about who we are and some key concepts, because really we're interested in answering your questions. So that would be kind of most of the time would be spent at that.
Yes, and you're always more prepared than me with the languages. I didn't practice anything in Finnish today, but I have to say, since English is not my mother tongue, I'm already speaking another language. So hello to everybody.
Exactly. Hello, everyone. So what we're going to do first is just tell you a little bit more about ourselves. So I'm a speech and language therapist here in Ireland. And a lecturer in the university in Galway. So I'm on the west coast of Ireland, and I'm involved in some research projects looking at kind of better ways to assess language in multilingual children, because in speech and language therapy we have issues where there aren't a lot of resources for us to test all of a child's language, which is what we're supposed to be doing. So then I created the blog Talk NUA, and actually I'm just at the moment writing a post about if you're multilingual, does the speech therapist need to be multilingual as well? So that'll be coming out next week, and I do my best to post every 2 weeks, but sometimes I don't manage it. But I cover everything from children who are late to talk to children who have speech problems, all with a multilingual kind of focus. And my thing is really that it's based on the research. So what I'm writing about isn't plucked from thin air. So that's Talk NUI, and you can find me at talknui.com. And then there is an EU-wide project called Peach, which is about supporting multilingual families, and I'm an ambassador for that, which basically means I promote kind of their materials. So all the stuff is free. There's a guide for how to raise multilingual children that I co-wrote. So there's a lot of information in that as well. And then together with Nadja, we created the Becoming Bilingual Facebook group, which is really a group for parents who have questions about their child's speech and language development, where they are multilingual. And in terms of my own kind of background and multilingualism, English is my mother tongue, and I speak Irish as well. And I am learning Italian thanks to COVID-19 and Duolingo. So I'll pass you over now to Nadja.
Okay. I think there's a lot of noise coming from someone. I hope you can hear me all right. As Mary Pat said, we created the Facebook page. That's actually how we met, I think. We're both speech language therapists. I'm from Germany, as already mentioned. And we got together because we're specializing not only in multilingualism, but also in late talkers, which means children that are a little later in their language development. And I remember the first time we spoke on the phone, and ever since then we created this group on Facebook, which is called Becoming Bilingual. And the intention is to have a group for people who have questions about multilingualism and speech development or problems that might occur with them. As I said, I'm from Germany, from Cologne originally. I grew up with German and Austrian because my dad was Austrian. And I've been living in Italy for 11 years now. I lived in the States for a couple of years. And my approach to working with families and especially children in the multilingual world is also very influenced by a psychoanalytical approach. And I normally 90% of my time I'm working in German. I founded a page called Language Families, Sprachfamilien. You can find it on www.languagefamilies.com. And I started offering coaching for families who try to balance their various languages inside the family, outside, inside. And thanks to COVID and the lockdown, I worked in the German school in Milan before. I started doing language courses online for children. And I'm probably going to refer back to them a little ahead, because a lot of the theory that you know about multilingual upbringing can be seen in those courses and can be seen how well they can work if children are motivated and see a purpose in what they do. So that much for me. I think we can go ahead with the presentation.
Okay, so the first thing we're just going to talk briefly about is some myths that you may have come across in relation to raising multilingual children. And actually, before I go on to that, we tend to use, like, you know, there are lots of terms like multilingual, bilingual, trilingual, and so we will use them kind of interchangeably, I suppose. So basically, a major kind of myth that's out there is that speaking 2 or more languages causes a speech or language delay or disorder. And like, the simple answer is that is not true. It does not cause, the current thinking is speaking 2 or more languages doesn't cause even a temporary delay in language development. And there's also a tendency, I think, to compare monolingual children with multilingual children, which really isn't accurate, because it's like comparing apples and oranges. Yes, they're on the same journey in terms of acquiring language, but they're not doing exactly the same thing. So I think we need to resist the temptation to compare, because with multilingual children, a key feature is individual variation between the children, and we'll come on to that later in a bit more detail. So it doesn't cause speech and language delay, and like, basically anyone who tells you that it does, it's wrong. Like, it's not fair, it's not backed up by scientific evidence to say that. Another myth that's out there is that children become confused and mix their languages because they're confused. And this isn't true either. The children begin to separate the languages from very early on, like even before they're born, they start to distinguish between the sounds of the different languages that they're hearing, and the grammars are separate. And yes, they influence each other, but that's not showing confusion. It's actually showing a deep unconscious knowledge of the structures of the language. So mixing and switching isn't a sign of a problem. And basically, children don't get confused. They are driven to communicate. So they will maybe mix in order to fill a gap in one of their languages to get their message across, but that's not a sign that they are confused. And then the last point there is that when we think about children who are multilingual, it's important to think about understanding and speaking and reading and writing, and that being multilingual doesn't mean that you are fluent in all of those. So let's say, for example, for myself, yes, I'm fluent in all of those for English, because that was my mother tongue. And then for Irish, I can absolutely have a conversation in Irish. I can do emails in Irish and texts. If it's a serious conversation, like with my daughter's teacher, she goes to an Irish language school, I'll do most of it in Irish. But if it's something that's like emotional or very important, I'll switch to English because I want to make sure I've got it right. And I rarely read anything for pleasure in Irish because it's actually I find I'm too slow. So like, it doesn't mean fluent in all of those.
Exactly.
Nadja, is there anything you'd like to?
Exactly, and I think that's really easy to understand, because I think most of you that are listening today have the experience of speaking different languages, and there's areas where you're more fluent because it's something that you live in a certain language, and there's other areas that you're more fluent in another language, and that applies to children, of course, as well. And the thing to be stressed really is children don't confuse the languages. And I might add something from my experience with my courses is very often there's children that mix the languages. They would speak to their mom in English, using German words, using some other words as well. But normally as soon as they understand that the other speaker does only speak one of those languages, they will probably stick to one language only, and will find other ways to help themselves. If they're lacking a word, like gestures or mimics or whatever, so they can differentiate between their languages.
And they also learn, I was just teaching speech and language therapy students actually about this yesterday, that they also learn very quickly the rules of the mixing. So they know, for example, the mixing tends to happen in like informal, casual conversations. So they know that, let's say, if they're talking to their friends who are bilingual, it's okay to mix and switch. But if they're talking to the teacher about something to do at school, that they tend to stay in the language of the school environment, so that it's important for them to learn the social rules around the mixing. So then the next thing we had was the 3 Ps. So this is from an American speech and language therapist called Catherine Cohnert, who has done a lot of research in the area. And the 3 Ps, I think, are just really important to bear in mind when we're thinking about our multilingual children's speech and language development, because a key characteristic is variation amongst individuals. And the variation is caused by several factors, and these are 3. So the people, who do they need the languages to talk to? So is it grandparents? Is it friends? Is it the teacher, for instance? And that will vary. And then the places where they speak the languages. So at home, at school, after school activities, on the playground will also plays a role in terms of the language proficiency. And then the purposes, what do they use the languages for? Is it explaining a science experiment, to the teacher at school? Is it showing a friend how to play a game? Is it for going to church? Is it for talking to grandparents? So those, to bear those in mind in terms, because it's a complex task they're involved in acquiring language. And Nadja, is there anything else that you'd like to add in there?
Yes, I was just thinking or reflecting on the groups I'm doing online, because I had this opportunity last year due to the lockdown to transfer my business, really, or to my courses to an online platform, which opened it up to children from all over the world. And you can see this, I was just thinking, doing play groups, because many of you for sure will look for play groups where children can communicate with other children in their language. But the purpose will stay if you are in a language group or in a play group with other German-speaking children, but the stronger language is Finnish, for example. The purpose is not really to speak in German to each other. Their purpose is to play and to communicate about everyday things, and they tend to do it in the language that is the community language that they make their experiences in. While you can see the difference, if there is a purpose and you want to communicate with someone, you want to play with someone, and the only language that connects you is German or English, you will take the extra effort to speak this language. So really purpose is very much for me about authentic purposes and finding the right motivation really to make children make use of their different languages.
Okay, so this is another one from Catherine Cohnert, who I reckon must like crime fiction, because mom stands for means, motives, and opportunities. So I thought it was a nice repurposing of it. And this is just, again, a kind of something to think about when we're supporting language development in multilingual children. And it stands for the means or language ability. So that varies, you know, across children. Motivation then is another factor, and that can come and go or change over their lifespan, because we're talking a long-term kind of a journey here. You know, this takes time. And then the opportunities are like a number of opportunities the child has to use their different languages, and how can we help create more opportunities. So Nadja, I think you wanted to say more about that as well.
Yes, that's basically what I just referred to. I think it's about opportunities. I think it's also about, you said something very important. I think it varies. It's not like the motivation stays up and, you know, it doesn't stay up for us. And I always, normally, some of you who know me from the language family background probably heard the story before. And I think, but it shows really clearly what is meant by motivation. When I came to Italy, and I spoke really, really little Italian, and it was really tiring, and I thought it would come easier, it would come by itself. It didn't. And I'm a perfectionist, so that didn't really help. And I never used it. I always got around it. I spoke English where I could. I spoke German where I could. And then the first friends happened to come and visit me here in Italy. And we went to a bar and I ordered a cappuccino. And people looked at me, my German friends said, wow, you sound like an Italian. And it just gave me the right motivation. And that's what I think, and it really pushed me forward learning the language. You know, if you feel you can do it and you're on a good way, that will give you a lot of energy to really go on with it and take, as I said, it's always an extra effort to use the language that is not your strongest. So you need the motivation to get to overcome or to use the extra energy you need to speak this language.
Okay, so now we just wanted to kind of share a little bit about speech and language therapists, you know, what we do and how we can help people. So basically, if you're concerned, I mean, I think our ultimate message really here is that if you are concerned that your child is like late to talk, or that their pronunciation is unclear, really it's the speech and language therapist who will advise you if your child needs further assessment. So by having a chat with you and you describing kind of your concerns and what's going on, then we can say, oh yeah, you need like further assessment. And we can assess children from a very young age. Like there's one test that I can think of that you can actually administer from when the child is a couple of months old. So it's never too early really to look for an assessment. So sometimes you might, you know, people would say to you, oh no, they're too young to be assessed, but that's not actually true. There's a lot we can do from very early on. And I suppose the earlier the better, I think, in terms of if you're concerned, because better to be reassured and find out you don't need the assessment than have waited and then find, well, like we could have started earlier, maybe, for instance. So I would say if you're concerned, ask a speech and language therapist. So we are the professionals then who are trained to assess children from a very young age and to identify what's the nature of the problem, and then work together with the family, obviously, to devise intervention. And the evidence basically is that if a child is multilingual and has a speech and language issue, all the languages need to be taken into consideration in the intervention, and not just current language use, but we need to have our eye on the future language uses as well. So that I'm not saying that like all the therapy has to be multilingual at the one time. It depends on what are the problems that have been identified, what are the child's needs, but that we attend to the need for all of the languages in the intervention. So Nadja, do you want to add a bit more?
Exactly.
there?
I just wanted to add something that comes up as a question as well in the chat right now. Do speech therapists need to speak all the languages involved? And I'm confronted with this very often, and I know how difficult it is. And I know a lot of families that happen to call me or write to me and say they just waited so long. They knew they needed help from a speech language therapist, but they're living in another country and they didn't really know who to turn to. And of course, like in a perfect setting, probably it would be great if you found a speech therapist who spoke exactly the child's languages, but it's not really necessary, of course. It's important you find someone who knows about what it means to be speaking different languages. It's important it's someone who takes into consideration those languages, because I hear a lot about parents that said, we went to speech language therapist and they made an assessment and said he's late and he has a smaller vocabulary, let's say, for his language, but they only assessed him in English and they didn't consider that the child was multilingual, which of course means a child that has vocabulary over 2 or 3 languages at a certain age has a smaller vocabulary for one particular language, because they learn more languages all at once. So it is important to be open to that fact, and of course it would help if you could refer to the other languages as well in some way or other. You don't have to be fluent in speaking all of them. But of course, if you happen to find a speech therapist who speaks exactly the child's languages fluently, don't hesitate to contact them. Of course, that's a plus. But
I think as well, just following on from that, Nadja, it depends as well on the nature of the problem. So let's say if we're talking the child is a late talker, so let's say they have, they're not using a lot of words, then if you and the speech therapist share a language, then the role there of the speech therapist is to coach you in kind of the techniques for how to develop your child's language, and then you do them in the languages that the child needs.
Exactly.
And then like the other thing like the speech and language therapist needs to do is, let's say if it's an issue of pronunciation or language, the speech therapist needs to go off and find out what is the sound system in Finnish, let's say, for instance, let's say if the languages are Finnish and Swedish, let's say, the speech therapist needs to go and do their homework to find out what are the speech sounds common to those languages, where do they differ, because that information informs the diagnosis. Because you need to look at, are the errors happening here because it's just the child is applying rules from one language into the other, so that's not a sign of a difficulty, that's just a sign of the languages interacting with each other. Or let's say, for example, I worked with a Latvian boy once who in English, his word order was very unusual. It was only unusual if I only thought through the lens of English. But if I looked at Latvian and went, oh, hang on, the word order rules there are different, and now they're spilling over into English, it's a different question. It's a different picture then, because one picture is a diagnosis that's wrong because I haven't considered the other language, and the other option is that actually, oh no, this is happening because this child is applying the rules of one language onto another.
Exactly. And just and we know well which or in what case we have to do what, like Mary Pat just said, you know, you can get information on about the other language the child is speaking and understand it's not a language problem. Or I was recently asked to do an assessment with an English Italian speaking girl that I, you know, sent to be assessed by Mary Pat, because I felt it was just, you know, a pronunciation thing that is very difficult online to do if it's not your mother tongue. And you know, it can be seen, especially in English. So of course I would send them to an English speaking therapist, and probably Mary Pat, if she had someone approaching them for a child speaking German, you know, that's the advantage of working together and about networking, so you can find the right person. And we're very much trying to find the right person, or helping people finding the right person to get proper help with, and understanding all the assessment, because not the assessment goes to hearing and auditive testing as well. And we advise people where they can find the best help possible.
And, you know, just following on from that as well, Nadja, in relation to, let's say, two things that just have popped into my mind. So let's say I'm working in Ireland, right? And let's say I meet a family who speak, let's say, Russian and English. And there are certain, because I'm not a native Russian speaker, and there are some sounds in Russian that I know theoretically, I know the phonetics of how they're produced, but I can't actually produce them properly. Then the role of the speech therapist is to work very closely with the parents in terms of, how does that sound to you when your child says it? And really then the parent becomes, it's more collaborative of a relationship. And I think that's really important. And I think that can cause trouble for some speech and language therapists, maybe, who feel like it takes a lot of confidence to step out of the expert role and more towards a collaborative kind of a situation. So that can happen as well. And the other thing, I was just thinking about a boy that I saw who spoke Italian and English. And what was really interesting was, and this is where the speech therapist needs to know about the languages. So there were more polysyllabic, or words with lots of syllables, let's say, in Italian than there are in English. And he was very good at those words in English as well, because of the influence of the Italian. So again, if I didn't know that, that would have affected how I interpreted what I was seeing in front of me. So, and actually on the Talk NUI blog, I'm going to have a look for it there to see if I can find it. I do have 2 posts where I've got, oh, well, I think they're great, like really specific things to say if somebody says to you, you know, you're confusing your child by speaking 2 or more languages, or you need to drop a language. So I'll find that when the chat is going on, and I'll put it in the chat.
Okay.
So then, sorry.
I just read a little through the chat questions. I think, Abia, you're gonna put them in a little order, but I could already see that there's a lot of questions about many languages being spoken inside the family. Like, for example, both parents speak different languages, and there's the community language, which might be a 3rd language, and there's a 4th language involved. And I see a lot of questions about, would it be confusing? How can it be handled? Exactly. There's one more. So 4 languages.
So there's just one more slide, actually, if you want to move on.
Yes.
That's our last slide then. Great, thanks a million. So this is basically like because of course we're speech and language therapists, we think you should ask the speech and language therapist. So then if you want to find us, you can find us at the Becoming Bilingual group on Facebook, and I just put the link in there. And then Nadja, her website details are there, languagefamilies.com. And I think you have a contact form at the end of that, don't you, Nadja?
Yes.
Where people can get in touch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then I have a contact form as well at talknui.com, or you can email me at marypat@talknui.com. And then really we just wanted to turn to your questions now.
Right. stop my screen sharing and then I can also jump into the chat. Yes. Many questions.
I've just put in there
But
the
yeah,
link. Sorry.
You put the link. Okay. Yeah, maybe we can straight jump to the questions where more than 2 languages are involved. And I think there's still quite often this idea of one person, one language. Maybe you could tell a little bit more about that, like how can it be organized when there's many languages involved, and how to do it so that the child actually develops them in an equal way.
Okay, so do you want to answer that? I don't mind that. Or
I was just thinking, because for sure it's something that I'm approached with on an almost daily basis now with a coaching I'm doing. And I always notice that people come and say, I try to stick to German, I try to stick to English, but it's really stressful. And then my husband doesn't understand and I try to include him, or the child comes back from daycare or school and they want to talk about school and, you know, all the terms are in another language yet. And then I noticed that very often I say, it's okay not to stick to your language 100% all the time. It will work out nonetheless. And I always feel them like relaxing, because I can see it causes a lot of stress to try to stick to this one parent, one language strategy, which really, if you look at it, there's not so much studies that actually confirm that this is the best way to do it. There is, I think, a study from way back that looked at how people did it, but it's really difficult to assess multilingual families because they're all so different. I mean, all families are different, but just with multilingual families, you can notice even more. There's mother tongue German, mother tongue English on the side of the parents, and maybe Finnish as a community language. But there's also, as you said, mother tongue German and Russian in the mom, and the dad who spoke all his life French, even though he grew up in England. And you know, you have this various mixes, which really make it difficult to assess and make studies that actually deliver valid confirmation of those strategies. So what I find, basically what works best is to be as authentic as possible, to do what you can do best in a way that doesn't stress anyone in the family out, which very often is like finding new balances every so often. It's something you might, you know, choose a strategy. For example, I use the strategy one parent, one language with my daughter because German back then was the only language I really spoke well, because I didn't speak very well Italian. So for me, it was easy to stick to it. And then when my husband came home, you know, if a child is 1 or 2 years old, that's quite easy. When she grew up, it got more difficult because my husband doesn't speak German, so we had to find new ways. So really, it's a process of finding new balances that make everybody feel most comfortable in. And it's not one strategy that will take your child along the road of multilingualism in the best way, and all the others don't work. It's not like this.
I agree, Nadja. And like my understanding about the one person, one language approach is that it originated from a description of what some multilingual families tended to do. And then somehow along the way it morphed into this kind of strategy. And like I agree with everything you said there. And I think for me, it's like, if it works for you, fine. But if it doesn't work for you and it's causing you stress, then don't feel bad about abandoning it, because the evidence doesn't say it is the best way or the only way. And when it comes to minority languages, one person, one language doesn't actually support the minority language enough, because the community language, you know, is more kind of dominant. So I would say authenticity and naturalness are very important. Now, if you like to stay in one language. There are like naturally occurring activities that tend to lend themselves to one language at a time, and they are singing together and reading together. So if you like, if you want to kind of keep things a bit separate, those are natural ways to do it. I just saw a question there actually about if the parent has a speech problem, will that affect the child's speech? So that's a very interesting question, I think. And basically, it depends. So let's say, for example, if there is a family history of stuttering, it doesn't mean your child is going to stutter, but if we were asking, about background information, that would be a question we'd ask: is there a family history? Let's say, for example, I had a lisp when I was a child. I didn't know I had it until I was 17. And then, as it turned out, my daughter had a lisp, but it went away of its own accord when she was around, I'd say maybe 9 or so. So it depends very much on the circumstances. For some diagnoses, yes, there is like a family history element. But without knowing the specifics of the circumstances, that's kind of as specific as I could be.
Exactly.
Yeah, thank you. So basically, what I heard is that every family kind of needs to think themselves, like, what are the languages that they want to give to the children, and how can they authentically do that in the family context, and to not stress about it, but so that everyone actually
And I think
has
one important thing that maybe we didn't mention enough, because I think it's one of the key factors really, is your own motivation as a parent. I just read a question real quick in the chat that said, what if my child is exposed more to the dad's language and he doesn't spend enough time with me, will she lose my native language? And I think it's really important that you reflect about what your language means to you, what it means to you personally, on a very emotional level, to pass on this language. And I think if it means to you a lot on an emotional level, you can pass it on anyways. Even it's not about quantity alone. Very much it's about quality time. So if you find your space with your language where you have quality time, and you, like Mary Pat said, you sing or you read, very often I find when you start reading books that you know from your childhood and that have an emotional value, that means very often as much to the child, because you transfer much more than just language. You transfer emotion, you transfer memories really, and it's important to get a connection there.
Sorry, I just accidentally sent a direct message to somebody there by mistake with a link to my blog. So sorry about that, because what I was wanting to answer there was somebody had a question about children with special needs who need to be multilingual. And I have 2 free ebooks on the website about, one is for multilingual children who have autism, and the other one is for multilingual children with Down syndrome. And basically the bottom line is, it comes back to, what does your child need? If your child needs 2 or 3 languages to participate fully in all aspects of their lives, that's what they need. And a diagnosis of, let's say, a language problem or having, Down syndrome doesn't alter the need issue. And there's lots of evidence to show that children with special needs can and do become multilingual. Now, again, we're talking within kind of the context of what is the level, let's say, of if they have a learning disability, how severe is that? But it comes back to need, really, is the key thing. So, and again, we're not talking fluent in all languages for everybody, but that if they have, let's say, Down syndrome or autism, or other, diagnoses or conditions, then it doesn't mean that they cannot be multilingual.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Not the thought, but great that also on your blog. That
Yeah, we are in language families. We have someone on the team, Maria Steele, who's based in England, and she is really specialized in working with children on the autistic spectrum who are multilingual. And she has a lot of experiences in working with them, and she does little language groups with them. She's German and German mother tongue as well. So if one of your languages is German and you have a child who has special needs in the autistic spectrum, probably she'll be a very good contact to help you find your way.
Because another thing I think to consider actually just popped into my head there is about, let's say, you know, people can be concerned about, is my child slow to talk? And really what's important as well is, what are they communicating about and what do they like to communicate about? So it isn't just about the number of words that they have and are they putting two words together. That is important, but their desire to communicate, their opportunities to communicate, how do they get their needs met, the use of gestures, like there's an awful lot goes on before children ever start to talk. That's important to look at as well, I think.
Mm-hmm.
There have been a lot of questions, especially on the motivation of the child to speak mainly the minority language. So if there's different languages at home and maybe also the community language, and one language is much more dominant than the other one, and the mother, for example, now in most of the cases, does understand the community language and the dad's language, and the child would respond only in that majority language.
Yes, I just saw another question as well, which goes back to this as well. What if, for example, the father doesn't speak? There was one question like minority language, or one of the languages, one of the family languages is German, and the dad doesn't speak German. He just speaks a little German, and of course he makes mistakes. Would it still be a good idea for him to participating in German in the conversation, in the family conversation, or will children eventually pick up the mistakes he makes in the language? And what I find, it's the same thing. It goes back to motivation. And if I am a child growing up in a family and I see my dad is actively trying to learn German, and he has the courage to make mistakes, which I consider the most important feature in learning a language. If I can see him as an example, making mistakes, learning a new word, putting his energy and his effort into learning my language, because for him, on an emotional level, it is important to speak this language too, because it's one of the family languages. I think it's the best background to really create a healthy environment for all the languages in which all the languages can grow.
I agree, Nadja. And you know, just following on from that, I think it was the same question about if let's say a parent is making grammatical errors, you know, because let's say in that case, if the dad's German, if he's making grammatical errors, will the child pick up the errors? By and large, no, because I have a colleague, for example, who is Serbian and she is married to an Englishman and they lived in Germany for a while. So they had all three, and she would have, it's not errors, it's basically where Serbian, so she would leave out things in English, was it, because of the nature of Serbian, and her son never picked up those grammatical errors, because he was immersed in English from very young once he started going to school, so he didn't pick up the errors. And I think it's such an important point that you made there, Nadja, about being willing to show your child, well, I'm happy to try and learn this too, and I will struggle, and I don't mind you seeing me struggle. I'm just thinking of my daughter that's learning Russian at the moment, and I'm having a kind of a go at it, and like, I think it's good for her to see me going, oh, hang on, tell me that again, or yeah, God, that's really hard, and just to be willing to give it a shot, you know.
Yeah, and it's a good point as well. If children can actually experience that someone speaks the language with doing more errors than themselves, and they can actually teach them in a fun way, maybe, because very often what I see in children when I meet them the first time in my groups, basically it's very often the mom. I don't want to exclude the dad, but it's very often the moms who are German mother tongue, and they have been speaking to the child in German, and the child, depending on his personality, of course, very often has made the experience, I do understand German, but really I suck at speaking it, because they compare themselves with a perfect a perfectly fluent mother tongue speaker, the mom, or when they go back to Germany and they see the cousins and the friends, they all, you know, they speak the language perfectly. And then they come into the groups and they meet other children that speak the language like them. They make mistakes because they are multilingual, and they never realize that they have a different way because they have more languages. And it's just where they grow and flourish really in this environment, because they feel like, okay, it's not because I'm too stupid or too slow, it's because I speak several languages. And they would just take this opportunity, and from there you can see it expand. It's something that's still surprising me every day, basically, how well this works, because it's a mindset thing.
And I just
That's
see
so
another,
beautiful.
sorry.
No, I was just thinking that's so beautiful, and I haven't given that a thought at all. That I thought it would be good to put my kids into contact with kids that speak German in like as their only language, so that they would learn how it really goes. But yeah, I do see the point that.
And it's actually, it's something I didn't really consider. It's not like 1.5 years ago, I sat down and thought exactly that. It's something I learned through the courses, and exactly that, like it helps create an identity, and it helps create, and it's important for every language, of course. It's important not only to create an English, a Finnish, a German identity, because they're not English or Finnish or German. They are intercultural and they're multilingual. So it's important, for my understanding, to connect with others that share the same experience, because otherwise they will always be somewhere else.
I just saw a question there about, is there something like too late or too early to start developing a minority language? And I would say never too late, because like language is a dynamic system, and so I don't think it's ever too late to start, really. No. I think it comes back to like we talked about, the 3 Ps, the purpose of the communication, the motivation as well. But I would say never too late. And I think Nadja made an important point earlier as well, around comprehension and the development of comprehension. So if you keep using the minority language and your child isn't responding to you, or doesn't seem to be motivated, not to kind of give up, because like it will pay off down the line. And I was talking to Nadja earlier this morning before we started, and we were talking about this idea about, it's like gardening. So you sow the seeds, you do the weeding, you water your plants, but you can't prevent the frost from coming, or you can't make the sun shine. So that can be difficult. And another analogy I read, which I liked as well, was it's like baking. So if you've got, let's say, a raspberry and chocolate cake, if you put in more raspberries, you get a more raspberry flavored cake. And if you put in more chocolate and less raspberry, you get a more chocolate flavored cake. So in terms of like the input in the different languages that the children are getting, what you put in, you know, does affect like what you get. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And coming back to the roots, maybe if you
yes,
because very often I'm confronted with people who approach me and say, you know, I gave up on our other language, which very often is German in my case, and he didn't learn it from me. My son didn't learn it. Now he's 7 years old, and I'm really sorry because he missed this opportunity. Is it too late? And they would say, he doesn't understand any German. And then you see through the process, it's never too late, because first, if you can relate to really family roots, basically, and to the motivation of your mom, because it's important to them, and they always picked up something. They're never like a beginner level. It's never like a foreigner trying to learn another language. There's always something that grew and took roots underneath that you're not even aware of. And very often parents introduce their children and say, she's beginner level. She can count to 10, but really that's basically it. And then they turn up in the courses, and within 2 or 3 weeks, they start speaking. And even the parents are surprised, because they didn't know that underneath there was going on all these routing, really. I don't know if you can call it like this. So yeah, I would encourage that. It's never too late.
And I'm just seeing another question here about where somebody says, while I'm not able to teach my children the social language which is Finnish, do I leave it for peer and environment influence? And I think that's, you know, a great question in terms of, because it's a community language. Like the way I look at it is, a community language is never in danger of not being acquired because it has the higher status. It's going to be on things like television and signposts, you know, publicly, all that kind of thing. And that to bear in mind, let's say when a child goes to school in the community language, that they have like 4 different kind of tasks to accomplish. So one is they have to like learn to get to integrate culturally and socially, potentially in an unfamiliar culture, depending on your situation. They have to establish relationships with their peers, get used to the culture. They have to learn the language for school, but they also have to learn the concepts. So they have to learn the idea of length or width or measurement or number or whatever in the language that's not their stronger language necessarily. And that all takes time, so that like maybe initially they can get the conversation stuff going quickly enough, like a year or two, to like really be able to have social conversations. And then the language for academic purposes can take longer. And like some of the research says that can take up to from between 3 and 7 years, depends on where you read, to have the technical academic vocabulary for school. So it takes time. And my inclination is more towards to support the minority language, because I do think the community language should look after itself. But if you are concerned, I think the peers who speak the language is a good way to.
Maybe it's a good question right now that popped up in the chat as well, because it refers back to that as well. Okay. Is would you suggest sending children to a school where the community language is spoken, or would you go for other schools? And is there a chance they really miss out on the community language? And I think that's a strong point, because of course that's something you can see happen in certain communities, that stick really like it's almost an island, the school, where the community language is not really presented. So it's the same with motivation. If you don't have contact, and if you don't have the purpose to speak to people, to other children in the community language, there could be something that, of course, could happen. So basically what I see here with the international schools in Milan, my daughter goes to an international school as well. Of course, you have so many children speaking the community language that they will not miss out on it. And sometimes I'm surprised, because she speaks English in school, she speaks German with me, and she speaks Italian basically with other children on, during break times. And then her Italian teacher tells me how good her Italian is. And I sometimes wonder where that comes from, because it's almost like the least input is happening in Italian, but it's working nonetheless.
And I think, Nadja, that's really interesting, because I would say my daughter goes to an Irish language school and we don't really speak Irish at home. And I had the same experience where the teachers would be saying, well, her Irish is great. And I'm going, well, I have no proof of that, because I never hear her talking it. So obviously you're doing something right. But I think as well, like the choice, choosing where to send your child to school is a very personal decision. So like I would say, why did we decide to send our daughter to an Irish medium school? There were lots of reasons. One was the school was around the corner, so we could walk to school. I'd heard it was a really good school. I'd heard like very positive reports about it as a school environment. And of course, I was predisposed towards her acquiring another language. And I am attached to Irish, but like there's more than language goes into the mix, I think, in making that decision.
Exactly. I think so too. And probably it's difficult to find a school where the community language is not represented at all. Of course you have to have a bridge to people speaking the community language, you have to identify with them as well to speak a language. That's what I was saying earlier. Like identity, of course, is a clue. And if you see yourself as an English speaking person in English school, even though you live in Italy and you don't have contact with Italian, it might happen, but probably it won't if you are integrated in some way or other inside the community you live in.
I'm just seeing another question there about are 4 languages too much? And I think,
Yes.
again, it comes back to the question of need. If you need 4 languages, if your family needs 4 languages, that's what they need. And we're not talking fluent in all 4, speaking, reading, listening, and writing. You know, it again comes back to the 3 Ps, the places they're going to be speaking those languages, with whom, and for what purposes. So I don't think 4 is too much.
Exactly. And I would also add, if it's not too much for you. I mean, if you as a parent speak 3 languages or even 4 already and you want to pass them on, if it doesn't stress you out, it's fine. If you're on a daily basis trying to fit everything in and you feel like none of them is sufficient and the communication is suffering from it because you're so concentrated on putting in the languages, then it might be too much and you should consider finding another way of doing it, which could very well be, you know, like Finnish or Italian or whatever. It's going to be Italian books for now, or it's going to be Italian games for now. And then for the rest, you can relax a little because you want to speak as well and you want to communicate as well. It's not only about language learning, of course.
And just when you mentioned books there, Nadja, I think that's an important thing as well, is about like reading together is like a very rich language development context. But don't feel like under pressure to, you know, read everything that's in the book. Really, the book is like a prop for a conversation. So for like toddlers, for example, a kind of a key thing is like to follow the child's lead. So to look at what they're looking at and talk about what they're looking at, let them turn the pages. It doesn't have, you don't have to read it from start to finish, because it's really that you're using it to have a conversation about the pictures, let's say, or, you know, the characters or what have you, but that it's a very nice context for focusing on, let's say, a minority language. And wordless picture books are a very good resource where there's no text in it. It's just you're looking together at the story and making it up as you go along together. So you're collaborating.
And another thing for me that works really well is to refer back to, or to have little islands that refer back to a certain language inside your weekly routine, which could be, for example, if you have someone living in the country where this language is spoken, like the grandma or a cousin, you could maybe create, like, you know, send a letter to them, send them something and talk about what you're going to do, what you're going to prepare for them. So the actual way of planning and thinking this thing will take place in this language. It's something we're using very much in the groups. Like we send something home to children, not like homework, but something like to think about, to prepare, to find a photograph, or to bring an object next week that they can show to the others. And because your mind will be set to the language you're going to be presenting it to someone, that's what actually creates those little islands inside normal.
And I think a key point you made there, Nadja, is about the emotional connection. So like that idea of the letter writing, let's say to grandparents, or like that's really important. And there was something else I was going to say there that when you were talking, that made me think of the, oh, sorry, it's gone.
Never mind.
Oh yeah, no, I've remembered. Sorry, I've remembered it. So let's say, for example, you have one language. I'm just thinking of situations that I'm familiar with. One language at home and a different language in school. Like you can talk about the schoolwork in your home language. So it's called like bridging, so that you, and also that it's good to have conversations about how, let's say, for example, oh, in English we do it this way, but in Irish or Finnish, this is how it happens. So that you're building what's called metalinguistic awareness, and you're having chats about the languages using the languages, because that's good for children's language development if they start developing this consciousness of, oh, right, in Irish the verb comes first, in English the verb doesn't come first, it's the subject or whatever, you know. But to have those explicit kind of conversations about the languages.
Exactly, and it helps much more, you know, with perfectionism, it helps a lot, because you feel like, very often I say to children in the courses, yeah, exactly, you're doing it this way because that's how you would say it in English, but the Germans do it this way. So it's really like, it's not you're speaking German in a shitty way, it's just you're speaking German with your English mindset, and it's actually really clever to do that.
Exactly.
But I would like to talk to one question, if I might, because it made me smile a little. I don't know, which says, my husband has a second mother tongue, which he is not too motivated to speak to the kids. Could I also start teaching the kids my husband's mother tongue? And really, it's something I hear very often, and I think it's really, for me, it's difficult to give an answer to that, because really it's about trying to make up for the lack of motivation or the lack of time that your husband has to passing on this language, and to understanding the need that maybe further ahead he might think it would have been nice to have this language as well. And I don't know, maybe someone of you has the experience if this really works, because I think it takes a lot of energy from our part to do something, or to make up for something someone else should be doing, or we would wish he was doing, and put our attention in this as well. Of course it could work, but I think the best way probably would be to get him involved in some way, to participate in that.
And I'm just seeing a question there about, you know, when the languages are close to each other. So Finnish, Hungarian, English, and how spoken Finnish can sound very much like Hungarian, and the grammar is similar. And like, just in terms of what the research shows, it does show that, yes, if the languages are very distinct, so let's say if you're talking English and Russian, or English and, you know, Mandarin Chinese, that is one of the influencing factors in the kind of the language development journey. But I think to me, it just boils down to need. So if those are the languages you need, yes, an influencing factor in your situation is that your languages are close together. It doesn't make the journey more complicated or less complicated. You know what I mean? It's just, that's the fact of the matter. And children sort those out, you know, those distinctions between the languages out naturally.
It's also an interesting question here that I'm also interested in myself. Does the child learn a passive language, meaning when both parents speak a different language and together they speak, for example, English, like in our case? So far, my kids don't seem to understand anything, but how does that theoretically works when they hear one language but they are never spoken to?
I think it boils down again to motivation. If you're really interested in what your parents are talking about, you probably will understand quite quickly. If you feel like, very often I have this example, and very often I see my husband here, who comes home at night after a long day at work, and me and my daughter are speaking German, and he actually enjoys the time off, and he just sits there, you know, whatever, daydreaming, half asleep, and he will probably not learn in this particular moment. But then after 10 years, and he never really took an active role in learning German, which is sad. But the other day he sat down and looked at my website, and he found out that he understood most that it said. So yes, he can't avoid learning some of it, of course, but and with a little more effort, you will activate that. I would say my husband, after 12 years that we are together, if we moved to Germany tomorrow and we stayed there for a year, he would have a much greater chance of speaking German quite fluently in a shorter time than someone who didn't have the passive input at all in all those years.
And just a very interesting question here is I'm seeing at the end of the list from Georgiana about a multilingual system in Luxembourgish
Yes.
schools, and you know
I
the
find that
effort.
really important as well.
Yeah, because like I'm thinking of years ago, I lived in New Zealand and I spent a week in a Maori immersion classroom for like I was learning as for adults, and we weren't allowed to use any English. Oh my God, I was exhausted because I knew nothing about Maori, and I spent so much energy trying to work out what the teacher was communicating to me. Now, she was a brilliant communicator. It was exhausting, and I was learning, let's say, how to tell time, colors, numbers, all in the language that I had really no background on. Background in. So I think it's a really important point about the processing load. And like I was reading about a study recently where multilingual children were tested on some language task in a noisy environment versus a quiet environment, and they performed poorly compared to monolingual children in the noisy environment, but they performed the same as
I
them
read
in
that as well.
like in the quiet environment, which makes sense because it's another load. So I think that is a good point about if you are expected, and in Ireland, like this is an issue where children go to school in the community language English, and there is no credit or attention given to, let's say, their home language, and no, like, not no, that's a bit extreme, I suppose, but it's not taken into consideration the effect it has on them to be operating in a language that is their less developed language for a whole school day.
Mhm. Exactly. And I can see, for example, here I was working for the German school, as I said before, they don't have a concept of being a bilingual school, really. They are like a German school would work in Germany. And children are learning how to read and write, even though they're not mother tongue German, and the German is not as developed as it would be for a child that's entering primary school in Germany. And while my daughter is attending an IB school here in English, and I was wondering the same thing, because of course it's more difficult to understand certain concepts if it's not your mother tongue. But they applying a different system of teaching them how to read and write. They're not teaching them to read and write as they would teach someone in England who's actually mother tongue English. And that's really important, because otherwise it will create problems, because you're just missing on the fact, how can you read or write a word that you never heard? It's much more difficult. And if your vocabulary is smaller, then your grammar will be less sophisticated at certain points in time, and you have to pay attention to that, because otherwise they will be overwhelmed, probably.
And just following on from that, actually, Nadia, when I think of, if your child says something and there's an error in it, let's say either in their pronunciation or their grammar, you don't have to like overtly correct them and get them to repeat it. You can just repeat the model or the correct model after them. So let's say, for example, they say tea when they mean key. I'm just giving an example from English, and you could say, oh yeah, it's a key. So you keep your model like natural, you don't go key, and you just repeat it like after them, because it comes back to what you said, Nadia, earlier about being kind of authentic and naturally communicative, that if you know what they meant, then it's enough to just produce the correct model after them in a natural kind of a sounding way and then move on.
Exactly. And it's very much also about what you said before about meta communication. If you open them a door and you say, like very often here in Italy, people or children will say, why did you do that? And they will answer, why I wanted to, because in Italy it's perché. So the system is right. They're doing it in the right way. That's how they learned it. That's how they understand the concept of being asked and answering. So if you open the door and you say, yeah, that's natural, you do it because that's how it is done in Italian. But then you draw the attention to, it's actually different in German. It's actually different in English. And they are able to accept that without being judged. they will pay more attention. So next time they will answer why, and you say, because you wanted to do that. They can pay attention to that because they don't feel they're, as I said, they don't feel they're stupid or being judged. They feel it has some value of what they do because it's actually coming from the other language. And I think that's really important for a school to be open to all the languages a child brings with them and not exclude them. And I've seen very often how it doesn't work in a very, very good way. Like the German school, very often, it's getting better now. But in the beginning, when I was working there, actually teachers said, I'm not giving this to you if you're not saying it in proper German. And it's like, yeah, that's how you kill a child's, willingness to be open to a new language, of course, and they won't learn like this.
For
Yeah,
sure.
I don't want to cut you here, but it's getting a little late, and people are dropping out. There was one question that I would want to get back to. Is there any book that you can recommend on multilingualism, or is it mostly about finding your own way?
Well, I'm actually writing one at the moment, but it's not. So I'd love to be in a position to say, "Here's mine," but I can't do that yet. So thank you, Nadja. So with the Peach project that I'm involved in, the Erasmus project, there is a free guide there called I think it's How to Raise a Multilingual Child. And that has, like, there's stuff in it on the different language strategies, on children who are late to talk, and it covers a whole range of issues. And like, I know the other co-authors, so like, I'd be happy to recommend that as a book, and it's free. And then there is Rita Rosenbach's, I can't think of the name of it. She's Finnish. Raising Multilingual Children, I think.
I think it is something like this. But if you look up Rita Rosenbach, I think it will eventually, you will find it.
And I just see one thing there about, sorry, now we could stay for ages about passing languages through books and playtime. Is that enough? And I would say, like you mentioned there, Nadja, about like other contexts, like cooking together, for example, in the language, or watching movies together in the language in question, and then talking about it. So yeah, you need probably more ideas than books and playtime alone, I would say. But again, I have on the Talk NUI, there's a free ebook with 26 different kind of ideas for how to encourage like language development in home languages. So you could have a look at that.
And it was really, really nice. The other day, I hosted a webinar in German about language strategies inside the family. And there was one mother who, they were actually applying 4 languages in their household. And it was so helpful. It was so encouraging and inspiring, really. And she, for example, they had different games. They had like a drawer with different games in them, and they put different colored stickers on them. So they would say this blue sticker game is a German game. So the mindset actually switched to German, and I had the same thing with books. So they actually, when they wanted to play something, they chose actively not only the game but the language that they associated
there are some
with
recommendations now also in the chat, so for everyone that's
someone
interested.
asked what the name of Rita Rosenbach is. I think it's Rosenbach with an E, or is it with a?
Rita there, and Mary has it's Rosenbach with a, or Rosen, BACK. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And I would, for everyone speaking German, I can really I would suggest all books written by I'm gonna put it in the chat, by Barbara Zollinger, who's a speech language therapist from Switzerland, and she has a psychoanalytical background, as I do, and it's less about multilingualism really, but it's about learning languages, and it's about opening doors, and it's about the mindset and about learning in general, and it's written in a way that's really pleasant to read. It's not something that's heavy. So I'm gonna put this in.
Oh yeah, sorry. I sent a private message. Sorry, this is the Peach guide. Sorry.
Yes, thank you so much. This was super inspiring and interesting, and we saved the recording and uploaded to YouTube. So for everyone who's not been here from the start or who had to drop out a little bit earlier, you can find it there. Everyone who had signed up also earlier will get the recording also through the event feedback form. So thank you so much for this. It was amazing.
Thank you really much.
Thank you.
I think you can see we're inspired, and probably I'm going to call Mary Pat now. We're going to go on chatting a little.
Exactly.
What we do for work. Anyways, yeah, thank you very much.
Thank
for
you,
your
everyone.
interest and
The
your
best of luck on your
input.
multilingual journeys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good day. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.